Good morning and happy Pride. It's great to be here with you this morning. Oh, you can be seated. Do I do that? I'm so sorry. Yes, happy Pride. It feels really beautiful to be here in a pulpit, speaking at a church, which has been the source of so much of the pain and anguish in my life, and likely many of you for much of my life. To be here on Pride, to be out and queer and see so many priests and people in leadership here. Also, I can sort of like locate my own experience in you all, and that's such a gift. So thank you. As I was preparing for this morning with you all, I was reflecting on my first Pride experience, my first Pride celebration. I was 28 years old, and it was in San Francisco. And it had been a long road to get to that Pride, and it was going to continue to be a long road after that Pride. I came out when I was 16 years old to my mom in a suburb of Dallas, Texas. And my family was very conservative evangelical. I was a very good Christian kid and always loved Jesus. I loved my community, and I really wanted to be good. And so when I came out to my mom at 16, I was obviously terrified, and a week later, she pulled me out of school early and took me to go meet a minister named Ricky Chalette, who was the executive director of Living Hope Ministries in Arlington, Texas. And Living Hope is still alive and thriving today, and it has many satellite campuses, and it's a Christian conversion therapy organization, which is the primary place that conversion therapy happens here in the United States in religious communities that are protected by religious freedom laws. And it was an organization that claimed to help LGBTQ people heal their same-sex attractions and live straight-looking lives. I ended up, because it was such a susceptible age, at the age of 16, so earnest, and I ended up getting really deeply sucked all the way into that organization and staying around for about a decade, devoting my whole entire self to this process of trying to live a life that I thought the people in my community might be proud of, and ultimately that they might come to accept and love me. It didn't work, and it was ultimately very damaging and very harmful as I began to see the harm that was causing, not just on myself, but on my friends. It moved me to begin to consider other ways of integrating my faith and my sexuality. And that took me to the Pride celebration in San Francisco. It was 2014, I was 28 years old, and I was there at that point because I had gotten to a place of accepting the fact that I was gay, and also that it wouldn't change, but feeling like I couldn't imagine leaving my conservative religious community because it was the whole world to me. I couldn't imagine a life outside of it. So I sort of tried to live this walk this sort of like Catholic line for a while of like, I'm gay, I'm gonna be honest about that, and I just won't act out, quote unquote, on my sexuality. I won't have sex, I won't marry, I won't be in intimate relationships. And then I realized I'm starved for affection and relationship because I'm just totally closed off and isolated. So I had a friend come into my life who I developed feelings for, and their name is Miles, and at the time they went by Amelia and identified as a woman, and the sparks sort of flew between us, and we entered into what we were calling at that time a spiritual friendship. Because it was a way of expressing some sort of partnership where there could be some tenderness and some seeing and being seen and giving and receiving love in a way that I thought might be acceptable within my religious community and religious system. And so Miles was in San Francisco marching in the Pride Parade with his organization at that time, and I was in San Francisco doing some of the activism and work I was doing. So I thought, this is my chance. I'm gonna go to Pride, and I'm not going to be approving of sin. I'm not affirming gay sex. I'm just acknowledging and celebrating the beauty and the humanity of the LGBTQ community. We're all God's children. And when I got to Pride, at first, I get sort of I sort of burrow through and get to the front, like up next to the barriers. And there was like the CrossFit community coming by, and I was like, yay, like people get to be open and out, and this is good. And I saw some churches and some moms, wearing shirts that said free mom hugs for people who were ostracized from their communities. And there was a lot, this sense of like warmth and beauty. And I was like, I can do this. I am celebrating all God's children. And then eventually some of like the folks that were expressing like kink and other sort of like BDSM, expressions start coming by. And obviously kink is expressed in every kind of community. It's not just for the queer community. But I had grown up with all of these messages about sort of the gay lifestyle, and it really triggered me. And it really, I started panicking, like literally having a panic attack and thinking like, am I sinning by nature of being here? Am I approving of sin? Am I approving of gay sex by nature of being here, which I still thought was sin? And I just start spinning out, and eventually I meet up with Miles afterward, and I'm like, whatever was going on in that situation out there, I must flee from, I must remove myself as far from possible. I cannot participate in it. And he was like, does this mean you're breaking up our spiritual friendship? And I was like, absolutely. And so I broke up our spiritual friendship, and I doubled down once again on the teachings that had been enslaving me throughout my entire adolescence and young adulthood, because I tell this story because the teaching that we see, the white nationalist Christianity that's really has a hold on our political system and in so many of the communities that we come from. That teaching isn't just about, it doesn't just come for queer bodies and women's bodies and trans bodies and black bodies. It's not just coming for us through legislation, which absolutely harms us. It also gets deep into our nervous systems. And the trauma of that runs deep in such a way that whenever I would begin to feel moved by the spirit within me that delighted in every human being and delighted in the ways that we give and receive love, whenever I was moved by that spirit, that the religious system that I came from that was harming so many of us would take me back, and I would hear in my head these voices that were sometimes from the religious leaders directly to me, and sometimes it was my own imagination just rehearsing the lines I had heard. And I'm sitting there at Pride, where it's such a celebration of how beautiful God has made the queer community, and I'm sitting there hearing the Apostle Paul, cherry-picked verses that had been weaponized against me. And it was a long road to freedom. I'm still on that road. But it was a long road to even get to this place where I can truly feel the love of God in this space, and in my relationships and in the way that I give and receive love. And so I want to talk a little bit today because I think that this impact of white Christian nationalism is it's very real, and I think we're really feeling that this weekend. I'm sure many of us are feeling unsafe with gun violence, with the backlash that we've seen in recent years to the freedoms we've gained. We're seeing a backlash that likely allows many of you to feel as unsafe as I do, honestly. And in these troubled times, I reflect on things that have brought me solace and what's comforted me. And so I want to share a few of those things with you today. With the first being, and this continues to be such a big lift for me, but finding my place in a spirituality that can hold the whole of who we are. Because, like my example from that Pride, the very verses that can proclaim freedom and be there to offer us comfort and to offer us solace have also been weaponized against us. And take this reading this morning. I was looking over it in preparation, and I found so many of the verses to be triggering for me, which is really upsetting because there's so much that's beautiful here. And I come across verses like this from our reading today. It says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves for one another." And I remember hearing verses like that so often, and every time I entertained the possibility that my queer body might be beautiful, that the way I give and receive love might be a gift, I'd be called back to that, and I would fear that I was giving in to fleshly desires and enslave myself once again to their abusive teachings. It was such a vicious cycle because the faith was the cornerstone of my life, and it was also the biggest pain point and the thorn in my flesh that kept me from being able to live a wholehearted life. And so at a certain point, I realized that I needed a new orientation to this faith that was enslaving me. I didn't need a new sexual orientation like I had been told. I needed a new orientation to this faith. And I began to wonder if this faith, that this community, this religious system that had been a source of so much pain might also be an occasion for healing. And I'm really relieved to tell you that it has been. I began to find that we read into the text of Scripture just as much as we read from it. Because right alongside those verses that triggered me, that could bring me back into places that were really dark, were also verses that offer healing and give us signposts all along the way of where we can be headed, where we should be headed to live in the Spirit as Jesus has called us. Our reading today says the whole law is summed up in a single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. It says to live by the Spirit, to be led by the Spirit, and we'll know, we can have confidence that we're led by the Spirit if we see the fruit of the Spirit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. We can find rest from our religious anxiety when we let go of our need for certainty and rest in the mystery that we were created in love and for love. That's our purpose in life. That's it. And that's the whole of the text, the whole of the Scripture, the whole of our faith communities and our religion that's so often used to weaponize against us. Jesus just summed it all up and boiled it all down for us and said, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And that call to love is both a comfort and a challenge. It affirms that that we're on the right path and we can have confidence when we see the fruit of love in our lives. But it's also a challenge to use whatever freedom and whatever strength that we found to lift up those who are suffering around us. I want to reflect for a minute on this Pride Sunday on an aspect of the LGBTQ movement over the last decade or so that I think highlights this idea of the freedom that we found in love, and then also the responsibility that we have when we begin to find that freedom. I think we've seen rapid changes in our society when it comes to LGBTQ rights, and it's such a gift to see, like Jane Lynch was just here, to see Glee, to see all these shows where we can locate our experiences in popular culture, and to be able to imagine a positive future for our lives as being openly LGBTQ people, to be able to see people marrying, to see, again, priests who share our identities. There's so much positive change that's happened. But I think when we look back at sort of decisions that were made along the way in the fight for LGBTQ rights, we see that we still don't have basic protections from discrimination in housing and healthcare and public accommodations. There are ways that we seem to go all in on marriage equality, which was such a win and it's such a gift. But in going all in on that, it seemed like many of us, once we sort of achieved that, and those of us who had access to sort of more wealth and comfort, we just got a little complacent, and we were like, okay, we got it, we're good. And as a result, the most vulnerable in our community, who still don't have those basic protections are suffering even more. We've seen an absolute assault on transgender folks over the last several years in every aspect of society. And the people who have the people who were not born into bodies that were naturally privileged and in communities that are safe, much like many of us, need to be prioritized. We need to continue to put all that money and all that energy and all those resources that we were putting into the fight for marriage equality. We need to continue with that sense of urgency for the most vulnerable among us, because it's not, many of us around the country are not experiencing the sort of freedom that we might feel today on Pride Sunday here in a church that affirms us and celebrates us. The call to love is a radical one. It's one that prioritizes the most vulnerable. And when I think about what that looks like practically, I think it's a lot easier than we often make it. When I was a kid, I wanted to save the whole world. I grew up evangelical, and that we believed that we were here on mission to literally save the whole world. And it's really daunting, and you can't love the whole world. And so in response to realizing I couldn't love the whole world, I found that it's easy to just kind of swing to another extreme of just focusing on myself and the people that are easy to love right around me. And I think the call of love, when we think about Jesus' call to love, when we think about the life of Jesus, is he was aggressively present to the individual people around him. Aggressively present. And it was always to the one, right? The one lost sheep, the one lost coin. And that was all of us. It was the person who was in front of him. And I think that love is really as complicated as we make it, and as much as we can get into big religious theories and political theories, it's really simple. It's paying attention, seeing the people around us, having that conversation on behalf of someone else. It's not something that we post on Instagram. It's not in memes. It's just really simply seeing people and responding to them out of the overflow of the love we've received. I'm working in a bar right now while I have been applying for jobs over the last 6 months or so. My whole background is in evangelicalism, and that is not a resume that translates easily to the workforce. And so in working in this bar, there's a guy named Henry who will pop in regularly, and he's just kind of become our guy. And he'll be like, hey, like sister, I'm homeless. Can I get some food? I can have some wings. Or he's like, hey, sister, can I have a shot of whiskey? And so we'll sometimes give him a little shot, give him a burger. And he came in recently, and I'm like, hey, Henry, what's up, man? How's it going? He's like, what do you need? And he was like, hey, sister, can I just have a hug? And it was such a tender moment. And I gave him, yeah, Henry, come on, bring it in. And I just thought, man, the vulnerability and tenderness of just coming in and asking pretty much a stranger, for a hug because he needed that affection. And it reminded me of this poem that in many ways feels like it sums up the life of Jesus and how he lived and what his message was. It's a poem, it's called The End of Poetry by one of my favorite poets. Her name's Ada Limon. And she says, enough of osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maple seeds, samara and shoot. Enough chiaroscuro, enough of thus and prophecy and the stoic farmer and faith and our Father and 'tis of thee. Enough of bosom and bud, skin and God, not forgetting and star bodies and frozen birds. Enough of the will to go on and not go on, or how a certain light does a certain thing. Enough of the kneeling and the rising and the looking inward and the looking upward. Enough of the gun, the drama, the acquaintance of suicide, the long-lost letter on the dresser. Enough of the longing and the ego and the obliteration of ego. Enough of the mother and the child and the father and the child, and enough of the pointing to the world, weary and desperate. Enough of the brutal and the border. Enough of can you see me, can you hear me? Enough I am human. Enough I am alone and I am desperate. enough of the animals saving me, enough of the high water, enough sorrow, enough of the air and its ease. I am asking you to touch me. People just want to be seen. And it's so easy, especially in weeks like this one, to get caught up in theory, in rage. It's easy to get caught up in religiosity and to miss sight of the fact that most people are asking us to touch them with consent. People want to be seen, and that's what Jesus modeled for us. He modeled seeing the people and seeing the most vulnerable and seeing the suffering and moving toward them. Finally, as I think about what offers, what I find comfort in, and what I believe we can find comfort in, and what's so beautiful, what's kept me coming back to this faith, to the message of Jesus over and over and over again, is that the fundamental truth about you and me and the person sitting next to you, the truest thing about you is that you are loved. We were created in love, by love, and for love. That love is not contingent upon anything you do. It is not something you earn. It does not discriminate. The message of Jesus is that you are loved because you breathe. I think one of the challenges of coming of age in oppressive communities is that we often develop coping mechanisms that then lead us to create more pain for ourselves and the people we love most in the world. So then we're dealing with the shame of those coping mechanisms on top of the struggles we already face by nature of being a human being in the world, and especially for those the world specifically does not want to flourish. The message of Jesus is that even the pain we ourselves cause can be mended. Even when we fail, even when we lose decades to addictions, even if we hurt the people we loved most in the world, you are loved and you are wanted. I'm not a fan of the kind of pride that says we're all perfect angel babies because we're queer. We know ourselves too well to know that that's not true. We're not above reproach. What we need to know even more than that is that we are seen in all of our complexity, in our darkness, our failures, the efforts we're making to be better than we actually are. We're fully seen in all of that, and we are loved. You are loved. You are loved. So let that love hold you in these troubled times. Let it inspire you to use your gifts and resources to make the world a little gentler for those who are suffering. Let it expand your imagination for what's possible in creating communities where everyone, especially those who are suffering and vulnerable, can know that they're wanted. Let it heal your deepest wounds, and let it remind you over and over and over again that the world is better because you're here. Amen.